When you think of Africa, the long-necked, gentle giraffe is probably not far from your mind. While they may seem plentiful, giraffes are facing an uncertain future, with a 40% decline in the last 30 years. They are now listed as vulnerable. In light of the threat to one of Africa's most charismatic species, Dr. Julian and Stephanie Fennessy of the Giraffe Conservation Foundation have dedicated their lives to ensuring the survival of the world's tallest animal. Collectively, they are renowned as the world's leading giraffe experts and co-founders of the Giraffe Conservation Foundation, which they run from their home in Windhoek, Namibia. Julian is co-chair, and Stephanie, secretary of the IUCN SSC Giraffe and Okapi Specialist Group, which they also helped establish. They have spent the past 20 years researching and working with others to protect giraffe populations across Africa. People think giraffes are everywhere, but the reality is they're on a path towards a silent extinction, says Julian. Threats range from habitat destruction to poaching, but there are even more sinister reasons why giraffes are disappearing at a rapid rate. In Tanzania, we have some report that people think the bone marrow is a cure for HIV/AIDS, says Stephanie. In the DRC, the tail is very popular, and we found 2 giraffe carcasses with just their tail cut off. What a waste! If you're caught with ivory or with elephant meat, there are high fines, whereas giraffes are easy to hunt. There's a lot of meat, and they're just not as highly protected. Julian's experience in the field of giraffe conservation means he knows giraffes better than anyone. With a background in species and habitat ecology, conservation, and land management across Africa and Australia, Julian also boasts experience in individual field projects, supervision of students, population, and countrywide assessments. And he continues to advise governments on the development of national giraffe conservation strategies and action plans. He has also conducted numerous conservation expeditions across every region of the African continent. The couple met while working together in Namibia in 1999, and were married in 2003 before moving back to Australia for a few years. In 2010, Julian and Stephanie, along with their 2 kids, moved back to Windhoek permanently. They have spent over 20 years researching the Angolan giraffe in the desert of far northwestern Namibia, establishing the Giraffe Conservation Foundation to raise funds and support increased education and awareness worldwide. Stephanie's work extends beyond the day-to-day business of GCF, specializing in project management within the private, government, and NGO sector on 3 continents: Africa, Australia, and Europe. Her expertise ranges from community-based natural resource management to technical sustainability solutions. While she particularly enjoys the fieldwork component, she's quick to point out that researching giraffes is not as exciting as one may think. It's pretty boring, actually, says Stephanie. We did a lot of activity budgets, where we would sit in the car for up to 10 hours a day and watch one giraffe, and write down what it did every minute for 10 hours. And as it turns out, they don't do much. Working in one of the world's harshest desert climates is where Julian feels most at home. Researching giraffe movement in and around the far northwestern Namibia, a landscape that receives less than 100 millimeters of rain per year, has given him unique insight into the survival of this species. There's a fog that comes in from the coast and influences the way certain wildlife survive there, says Julian. In the first 5 years, I never saw a giraffe drink, which I thought was maybe me being a bit stupid. What I later realized was that this fog comes in from the coast on an average of 250 days a year. It's absorbed by the trees, and the giraffes absorb a lot more moisture by eating from those trees during the early morning hours. They don't need to drink. It all comes down to survival, and that's obviously one of the best ways that they have been able to survive. Julian and Stephanie established the first use of GPS satellite collars for giraffes in the early 2000s, contributing to exponential learning on giraffe movements. Their findings offered insight into the best ways to protect giraffes and provided specific details into the landscapes in which they thrive. Perhaps the couple's most significant contribution, however, has been their research into species DNA. For nearly 20 years, they have been working to figure out who is who in the giraffe zoo. By working with people across the continent, they have been collecting giraffe DNA samples to understand the different species of giraffe and how much hybridization there is between species. We have about 1.5 million years of separation between some of these giraffe species. If we took that in the context of bears, there are brown bears and polar bears, and they're about 800,000 years in separation. So the whole theory of what a species is has been thrown out the window over the years. What Julian hopes to demonstrate is that perhaps we shouldn't move giraffes around if they are different species. It might be important not to mix Maasai giraffe with reticulated giraffe, for example. The most interesting research has come out of Kenya, where the couple has been working with the Kenyan Wildlife Service to collect DNA samples. Kenya is home to 3 species of giraffe and is a hotspot for the giraffe. With nearly 300 samples taken to date, the team will begin analyzing the data. We know giraffes breed together in zoos, but why don't they do it in the wild, says Julian. That's the big question. And the reason from all our samples so far is that they just don't. And there has to be a good ecological factor that we don't yet understand. But it's not all data and science for the Fennecies, whose work can be as diverse as sitting in front of a computer working on budgets, to planning a translocation, writing a giraffe strategy for a country, or translocating a giraffe across the Nile River. We've done 2 big translocations in Uganda in the past 2 years, said Stephanie. It's physical work, bringing a giraffe to the ground safely. We worked with a fantastic team from the Ugandan Wildlife Authority and spent a few tough and dangerous days translocating giraffes. There was lots of excitement and exhilaration, particularly at the end when you can see the giraffe crossing the Nile on a little ferry, and then you release them on the other side. For Julian, the design improvements in giraffe tagging units have brought him great personal satisfaction in improving the welfare of these animals. Whenever we bring down an animal, it's scary. You have to give a massive drug overdose to bring down a giraffe, and every time it gets back up, that's the most amazing feeling. Partnerships with governments are essential for the Giraffe Conservation Foundation, whose model is to supply all giraffe conservation support. They work with many African governments, including their most successful, working with the Ugandan government in developing a national strategy for giraffe conservation. Unless you have government buy-in and support, everything will just be interim. So developing national strategies and working closely with governments is crucial, says Julian. We don't want to grow to be a huge organization where we're in different countries with different projects. We think it's a much better strategy for us to support others to do work in an area they know. We're strategic in picking partners. We work a lot with governments. We work with local and national NGOs. We look to find the best partners in every setup where we think it's important to work. In addition to their work on the ground, the Fennecies have been instrumental in raising awareness for giraffe conservation worldwide by establishing World Giraffe Day, June 21st, the longest day or night for the tallest animal, to raise awareness and funds for their tall friends. Embraced by zoos around the world, Giraffe Conservation Foundation works with many of these organizations for mutual benefit. We work with zoos by getting keepers out into the field to increase their passion and make them ambassadors for giraffes and GCF, says Stephanie. In Uganda, we had a group of American vets with us, as well as other giraffe experts who were involved with the capture. And they helped us look after the giraffe when they were in the boma because that's their expertise. With the help of the specialists, the first ever X-rays of giraffe hooves were performed in the wild, thanks to the Giraffe Conservation Foundation. With a variety of issues with hoof health affecting giraffes in captivity, the X-rays gave insight into the difference in feet between wild and zoo giraffes, so that zoos can better care for the animals they have there. In chatting with the Fennecies, it soon becomes evident that they turned their passion into their day job. However, the work they're doing remains the former. With a schedule that takes Julian from Namibia to Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Paris, and the USA in the first 6 months of 2018, there's no doubt about his commitment to the giraffe. I feel like I've grown up with these animals. They're my mates. Everyone thinks giraffes are everywhere, but their numbers are plummeting. And I think it would be a sorrowful world without giraffes, says Julian. Stephanie is equally dedicated. They are amazing animals. When you see them out in the wild, they're pretty unique and iconic, says Stephanie. It seems like we're making a difference, and not many people can say that.